Right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the virtual launch for the book United People, Essays from the People Sector on Singapore's Journey of Racial Harmony. The book has 22 contributors, and I said in a Facebook post a couple of days ago that we're going to have a football team of speakers tonight. Well, first, some news on the team lineup. One player, unfortunately, can't join us tonight, but we have a late substitution, Kirpal Singh, the creativity guru. And let me just quickly introduce the other speakers. We have with us community activist Salima Ismail, researcher and former journalist Brema Mati, socio-political commentator Viswa Sadasivan, whom I'm sure many of you have seen online, the president of the Eurasian Association, Alexius Pereira, marketing and business consultant Joyce Lim, a national serviceman and TV producer Billy Stephen Tay, Asian languages professor at NIE Tan Chi Lei, academic at LaSalle College and former nominated MP Audrey Wong. So this is our football team of speakers who will try to reflect on the goal of becoming one united people. I thought we could organize our conversation this evening around three main questions. And the questions are as follows. Number one, what do you think is the most positive aspect of how Singapore has managed its race relations up till now? Number two, which issue affecting racial harmony here do you consider most important at present? And number three, what's the top item on your wish list for the future of Singapore's racial harmony? For the first question, looking at the positive aspect of Singapore's race relations, I thought it is good to start on the positives because Singapore, compared to many other societies around the world, is actually in a very good place. According to the Pew Research Center in the USA, which is one of the most well-regarded survey organizations in the world, there was a survey that they did between March and May last year, 2021. And they found in that survey, based on more than 16,000 phone interviews with people in 16 advanced economies, that people in Singapore reported the lowest proportion, 25%, of conflicts between people of different ethnicities than any other public survey, which means that we are, according to this poll, we are number one in the world in racial harmony.
Wow, great.
What do you all think is the best thing that we've done to keep us all together all these years?
If I may begin, Pak Song,
sure.
I think it's the relentless manner with which, starting with Mr. Lee Kuan Yew and carrying on now, the whole of Singapore has actually joined hands, as it were, and hearts and heads, because we need all three, yeah? Head and hearts and hands, to make this ideal kind of goal of living together in peace and harmony a reality. And I think, of course, in trying to make such a noble goal a reality, there will be missteps. And there will be sometimes be even steps that are a little bit backward. But on the whole, I think, I've been following this from, obviously a very young age when we were still under the British. I was reading Janet and John, book 1, 2, and 3 in my primary school. So having gone through the colonial era, gone through the Malaysian experience, and then finally in 65, our own independent sovereign state, I can say with great confidence that we haven't done too bad. We haven't done too bad. I won't say we've been totally 100% successful, but, I think we, on a score of 1 to 10, we're probably hanging around 7, 7.5, which is very, very good considering the very delicate nature of the question that we are trying to address.
Do the rest of you agree with Kirpal's?
If I may just come in responding to both the Pew survey results of 25% that were perhaps race-based conflicts, because I think that part wasn't quite clear in how you were sharing that information. And also on what Kirpal has said, I think what we have done right for a very long time is our pledge.
Yeah.
I think we have gone through a school system where when I went to school, the pledge was explained, the phrases were explained, and the discipline of standing still when you say the pledge or whatever, it went beyond the tedium of saying the pledge and standing still because the words were explained. There was contextualizing of why it was important. Because I went to school in the aftermath of all the independence and the race riots, etc. So there were many instances that could be drawn upon. And I think that today, for me, is emblematically the most important thing, the pledge. And I think when you mentioned the 22 contributors, quite a number of the authors who shared their views have also said how important the pledge is. So I think that is the good thing that was done. And I think, thankfully, we have to say thanks to Mr. S. Rajaratnam, who pondered and also argued, both of them, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew and Mr. Rajaratnam, had their own arguments over the language used, the content of the pledge. I think that is our hallmark, which I think very few countries outside of Singapore have such a clear and a rigorous approach to the pledge. That is what I would say is something really good that we have started. Yeah, thank you.
If I may add, for me, since you are starting on the positive, would be definitely one is school, public school. Public school for us, for me, for growing up, was a space where I interact with students from different races. That's one, and it was a neutral ground. It was a safe space. You know, we were just kids. We don't think ourselves as one race or the other. We are just in school on a safe space. Then the other thing for me definitely was living in a HDB flat. I feel that one of my life blessings is to grow up in the heartland. My family we were one of the first to move into, it wasn't even called HDB then, it was called SIT flat. My family moved in the 1966 to one of the SIT flats, and my older sisters and brothers witnessed racial riot. We were living in Macpherson, so they were physically, as kids, witness to the racial riot in Macpherson. I was born the last year of the big racial riot, which is 1969. And so the HDB flat was everyone, that was the first time they lived outside the village. My next door neighbor, a Chinese neighbor, it was the first time two families live outside their homogeneous village. They are witnessing racial riot, and both families decide, let's do what we can to protect each other. Let's do what we can to help each other. It was very organic. We just helped each other, young families with many kids. So that was, I thought, one of the positive for my generation, for sure, growing up from 1970 onwards.
If I may just add on to Salima's point, I realize a lot of the panelists have brought up going to school as one of the most poignant memories of our most positive aspect of how we've managed our race relations. And it's true, perhaps because the memory is a lot fresher in my head, I can, explain a bit. But basically, throughout secondary school, primary school, every day of the school week, we would say the pledge. And every day it will be in a different language. So Monday will be in English, Tuesday will be Chinese, Wednesday will be in Malay, and then Thursday will be in Tamil, and so on and so forth. And I feel that we have to thank our education system for this, because since young, we have modules like, CME, Civic and Moral Education, which really, really emphasize the importance of race relations and racial harmony. And so when you are inculcated with these values from young, it becomes almost second nature growing up. I'm not saying it's perfect that everyone will, of course, maintain the peace and live by those sort of teachings, but it is a very, very important step that is inculcated since very young, like even nursery.
If I might add to that, I think, Billy, I like what you said about saying the pledge in different languages. And for me, one of the strongest memories of primary school was having to learn to sing songs in different languages, right? So you would learn, learn a Chinese song, you would learn like Chan Mali Chan, and then we had to learn the Tamil song,
Yep.
And it was, and even though you didn't understand the language, I think it's just the experience of it and kind of knowing that there is this diversity and it just gave you the awareness. But I was thinking about this question and I thought maybe one of the things that Singapore has done well is actually to put race out there all the time. It's like it's always there in public discourse, in everyday life. It is there. Whether we speak of it positively or negatively, but it is there. We are always so aware that there is racial diversity, racial difference. So in a way, I think that is in your consciousness all the time. And I suppose that either forces you to really be sensitive to a lot of things, or be appreciative of that richness, or to just be used to it and live with it as simply like part of your normal everyday reality. So I think quite interestingly that this subject keeps coming up all the time. So it's like we don't shy away from it, and sometimes we may not handle things always perfectly or that well, but it's always there. We can't run away from it, and we know we can't run away from it.
I think it's a part of us, because everybody's talking about it and we tend to take it for granted, because we have a very strong culture of shared traditions. Like when it's CNY, everybody is celebrating CNY. When it's Hari Raya, so we have a lot of that cross culture within our communities that just becomes part of life. And I like what Kanan wrote in the book. His first line was, he grew up colorblind. And that word struck me and be like, yeah, actually a lot of us grew up colorblind, right? And when people talk about race, national service, you see the way the guys bond, and I'm sure you guys can relate to this, because I see my kids, the way they bond with their buddies, and they talk about stories of how they dig the hole, they're there 24 hours, rain, sunshine, and all, and they bond, and they're like in this together. And there's no talk about color or race, because it's cross-culturals and it's just part of life. So I believe that we tend to take it for granted. And it's, for me, when we started to do the book, and I said, Reza, what cultural, what? We are so diverse. And then I started to have a consciousness to talk to some of my white friends, quote unquote, right? And then they say, yeah, I'm like the token Angmo in Singapore. I'm always regarded as the token Angmo in Singapore. And they felt that Singaporeans are more racist towards them. So I found that very interesting, right? As a conversation of my friends who have lived here for so long. They speak Singlish with an American accent. But when I bring up the word race and religion and cultural differences, and they say, yeah, Singaporeans always call me the token Angmo. So I'm like, oh, okay. So it's very interesting, right? Because when we talk about Chinese, Malay, Indian, others, it becomes so much part of the fabric that for me, it's not even a question. So it was just interesting to look at the other perspective of some of our other friends from other countries who have made Singapore their home, and how do they feel? Something to think about. I just wanted to share that thought.
For me, I've never grown up colorblind. From the moment, as long as I remember, I've always been quite aware of racism, and also have been victims of racism. So it was very hard to be a colorblind when racism is directed to you. Of course, as a kid, I often wonder, for example, I remember my first encounter of racism was at the playground. I had someone at the playground telling me that I'm a child of a Keling Paria. And in my home, we've never used such word. I didn't even know what Keling Paria means. My mother is Indian, so that's why. And I remember going home, taking the dictionary and looking up the meaning of Paria. I was like, really? Why was my mother calling Paria? And why was my mother called a Keling? And then I asked my mother whether she had been called such words. So I was very aware, but it wasn't so directed to me. It was only directed to me only when I started working, because school was a safe space. Yeah. people treat me at least equally. But the first time I encountered racism really was the first, when I started looking for jobs. That was when I realized, like, wow, my God, I didn't realize it was more than I thought what it was. And I decided to run my own one-woman campaign that every time I go for a job interview and they ask me for my race, I actually tell them, I have filtered you out of my job selection. Asking me for the race, I'm like, I'm sorry, I feel that this question on race is not required. I do not want to work in your company. I guess it's different, but I definitely was aware.
I think it kind of struck me that Salima's very honest sharing, after 6 remarks, which were very positive, perhaps indicates that the positives that we have in Singapore society in terms of racial harmony, and there are many, exists amidst negatives and potential negatives. So this is perhaps a nice segue to move to question 2, which is what do you all think is the issue, the most important issue affecting racial harmony at present?
No, if I could chime in here, I would like to comment on the first and second, because they're linked. I'm currently reading a book on Malaysian politics. And I think it struck me when I was reading the book, how fortunate we are that we don't have communal politics in Singapore. And we take it for granted. Communal politics, once it's introduced, can have such a powerful impact on our psyche. And we don't realize how fortunate we are that from day one, our political leaders ensured that we will not go the way of communal politics and legitimize communalism. And that was very important. And it got me thinking, what if we also went the way of communal politics, like in Malaysia? How would we end up being? I think we would have been finished. We would have been finished, especially when you look at the demographics of Singapore, with one race that's so dominant, 77, 75%. It's less dominant in Malaysia, actually. The disparity between the percentage of Malay, Bumiputra, and Chinese is less stark than the percentage of Chinese in Singapore. So I think if communal politics was introduced in Singapore, was allowed, we would have finished. That's number one. And balancing that, meritocracy. Today, we are seeing negative side effects of meritocracy, and therefore we have to rethink the way we introduce meritocracy. But in the early 60s, in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, meritocracy was a way of reinforcing that we are regardless of race, language, or religion. Mm-hmm. I remember something that my father told me as he was holding my hand and walking me into Raffles Institution, because I got into Raffles Institution, right? And he, by the way, rest his soul, didn't like Lee Kuan Yew at all. He was a campaigner for Workers' Party. But when he walked into the old Bras Basah school, there's something he told me in my language, in vernacular. He told me that you must be, he said, I don't like Lee Kuan Yew, but you jolly well respect him, because if not for him, you will not be in this school. And if we were in India, he said, there's no way, because we are poor, that you will be able to get into the top school. He said, you must always remember this and be grateful, even as you're critical. And I've held that in my heart, what my father told me. In the name of criticism and wanting things to be better, we must not be ungrateful, unappreciative, or lack in humility. And together with that, I agree with the others that national service helped to institutionalize it. Unfortunately, it only had a positive effect for boys, So therefore, it is not as universal as it can be in its positive effect. But I think, if you ask me, one of the most important thing is that we eschewed communalism, and we must continue to remain so, and that is my fear. We must continue to remain so, because some of those values that we fought for, such as Malaysian Malaysia, it must translate naturally into a Singaporean Singapore. And there are days when, as a minority, I am concerned that some of those fundamental values are fraying. on the edges.
Maybe I'll just start off with a quick anecdote. Since you all were talking about school, right? When I was in school, every time I had to fill up a form under race, I would write human. And I would get all the teachers totally upset. But later on, I studied sociology and eventually became a community leader. And so my perspective on this will also cover both questions. And what have we done right in you call it the early era? And I think one of the very important things was that the people of Singapore saw the outcome of the race riot and decided among themselves that they do not want this to happen again. So all the groups, regardless of the policies and whatnot, I really saw that all the communities were willing to compromise, whatever it was, religious practices, language, whatever, we were willing to compromise. We were not going to bank table and demand whatever it was, what would be our language for it. So the communities decided to compromise. And this is really important because the issue of communal politics is I'm not going to compromise, we want power. So we have sidestepped communal politics, but I wonder whether we have imported a strange sense of identity politics today, something we imported from the West, something is actually quite alien to Singapore, and we have absorbed it in some ways whereby, certain terms are now being used here, not in a very accurate and correct way, to start demanding and to be less in a compromising atmosphere. So that is one of my views. The second view is that from a long historical perspective, most writers, most societies will say that, when you have a multiracial, multicultural society, it's a recipe for disaster. Usually they would say, the nationalists would say, there needs to be one this, one that, one everything. But my larger position, as I wrote in the book, is that actually Singaporeans don't have to choose whether they are a member of their own race or being a Singaporean. They can be both. And I think it is this acceptance that we can be both a proud member of our race, ethnic group, religious group, whatever, as well as a proud Singaporean. That has held us together so far. Thank you.
Okay, may I come in? I want to take up some of the comments made, and also I would like to share my thoughts on what has really sort of put things a little bit, it is harder from my perspective, certain parts of in our evolution as a country, Singapore. I think a lot of us have narratives of shared experiences, of being the outsider, of being marginalized, of being made to feel that you are not up to par. And often we do not function transparently. Sorry, you're not accepted. Then you walk away wondering what it is. Not all the time are you going to get like, oh, I do not want you because you are not of the majority that is a Chinese person. Seldom, because after that, all the arrows will come back to the person, right? So there's a lot of protection devices that are put into practice when you want to just close your door completely. So I think actually, I'm going to part 3, Rick. The narratives of shared experiences, I think we need to capture, because the whole notion of being colorblind, to me, is a little bit offsetting for me. And maybe Kirpal knows this. I did my research in African American literature, and I loved it thoroughly because it opened the whole history of whatever a person has gone through and then functioning in modern day America. And why does the past come back? What has happened, etc. I see indicators in our society. I'm not saying we are going that way, like we are falling into the pit. No, but I do see indicators, some dotted lines even, that I think we need to start speaking up. So on this second point that I would like to share my views on communal politics, what do we mean by the definition of communal politics? In what I have shared, I have said it from before, I will say it again, and I will say it in the future. I do not believe at all in the 4 self-help groups. That to me is very communal. What is the common refrain in all the 4 self-help groups? People in need, people who need specialized care, people who need some attention. Let's do away with that. And yes, like in other countries with many ethnic groups, a specialist person will come, let's say it's a domestic violence and the children are all affected, their education, that person can come and work within that cultural context. We pool our resources, we pool our finances. To me, that's an institutional approach of really separation, although I understand the rationale, but I find it hard to accept that we are a common people, one united. We have common issues as the human race. Some of it will go into specialist help that is needed, can be done, but we don't need this institutional mechanism. Another example is that I have raised communal politics. To have the leaders of our country cite that we cannot have a prime minister because the person is a non-Chinese, is an Indian, I think is to me a definite no-no. They ought to be leaders of strong moral, exemplary behavior to tell us this is not acceptable, we got to change our mindset, etc. If there are communities that feel, oh, I do not want a non-Chinese prime minister, I think that is not appropriate, that has not been appropriately done, right, in the past. The direct answer to the question that I have, what is one of the things that I think have come into our past? I have put quite a bit about why our past gives us a lot of good examples, is I think the functionality of the English language. To me, the English language is a neutral language that belongs to all of us. It's nobody's native language except for some pockets of Europeans who are Singapore citizens, or whoever who is part of our realm of communities. Otherwise, it is the neutral language that brings all of us together. The approach today we face over a number, I think from about 2 decades ago, is almost in some instances, and there's no research yet thoroughly on this, the replacement of English as a lingua franca with Mandarin. Now, and language has caused divisive politics across many countries. I have done studies in conflicts and peace issues, and you find that it's either race, language, or religion that causes all the fissures. So here we have something that I think we need to bring back to the forefront, which is a third part that you're going to ask, Rick. What do we need? We need to reclaim English as our neutral language of cohesion that brings us together. It cannot be, and Mandarin is a functional language. Yes, there is the cultural side to it, but it's also a language of trade. And I think one of the authors in the book, I cannot remember who, put it very clearly. Do we still need the mother tongue policy, or should it be a second language policy with a lot of choices in second language? If I dream that I want to really work in Vietnam, then I want to look for Vietnamese and become really good in my Vietnamese language, for example, or South Korean or whatever. We are a globalized city, and therefore to prepare what are the tools we take away with us, what do we keep within ourselves, I think our combined common platform of a good conversations, of many good conversations in English plus many other languages, but English has to be our binding force. That has been eroded into, is my take, over the seepingly and some quite overtly, I would say. So that is what I would like to share. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay. If I may just add on to Brema's point, what she says was really struck out to me very poignantly, because right now I'm in an army camp and I work with a lot of NSFs. And I never realized that I would seep into Mandarin when I am working alongside my fellow NSFs. And only after reading your essay and the line about how Mandarin is slowly replacing English as the lingua franca, did I go and really reflect, like, why do I do this? And only then did I become aware that I was actually leaving a lot of my other colleagues out that either didn't speak Mandarin or were of a different mother tongue. But even more poignantly, and I should share this. So in my clique, I'm Chinese, but few of my friends are Malay. So I'm poly days. So when we go and eat, sometimes they would speak in Malay and I would not understand what they're saying. And only when I was been through that experience did I understand how it was like to not sort of belong or feel included. Yeah, so that was just something that I wanted to say that really struck out to me. And also to answer Baksong's question about the issue is that this is an example of how sometimes I feel like we rest on our laurels or we're too comfortable, especially in an environment where you are the majority. And we often forget that we need to include those around us that are of a different race, speak a different language. We have to basically spare thought for not just your own race, but also other races as well, because we're all Singaporean after all.
Can I interject here? One is a question for Brema. I personally didn't see that Chinese Mandarin was replacing English. Perhaps I'm in a different bubble where everyone speaks English, so it could be as a result of the bubble I am in. But I definitely feel that English is what has held us together. It is a common neutral language. It's one of our success stories. It's one of the positives of Singapore over the last 50 years. It's because we speak English. It doesn't matter whether we speak the Queen's English or Sing English, but it is English where everyone understands. That's number one. The other thing is, I feel that it's time for us to question the HDB policy, the ethnic integration policy, because that does financially, economically affect minorities. If they can only sell the flat to another minority. And so that you have a smaller market, you automatically have a smaller market. So that I think it's about time. The EIP policy may have worked over the last 50 years, but it's about time we review it and find something else to ensure inclusion and diversity in our heartland. So that's one. And the other thing about the Pew research, I thought when they say, well, we don't have such racial conflict, it probably, I do not know, when I hear it, it seems to me it just focuses on conflict, but not racial, the subtext or subtlety, because racism that happens on daily basis, it's a micro racism. But when you have a series of micro racism that's directed to you every other hour, every day, it adds up a lot. But it will not be considered a racial conflict. So a survey like that will not capture that. But if you are the one who is facing it, those micro adds up a lot in a lifetime. So I would take that survey with a pinch of salt unless it covers micro racism, all this subtext. So that's what I want to share. The other thing about Viswa talk about communal politics. For me personally, I'm not really convinced we don't have communal politics. I think we do have a little subset of that because of the GRC. It may not be as big as in other countries in Malaysia, but the GRC where you need to have either an Indian or a Malay in that GRC, that's based on a race. So it's a little bit of a communal politics, I feel. And not being able to have a Indian Prime Minister, I'm a big fan of a certain very clever, wise Indian man. It's a huge disservice to Singapore. He's so skilled, so talented. It's such a disservice to Singapore not to have a man of such caliber, to denying us of such a man as our Prime Minister.
So I just want to add on to what Salima has raised. No one is saying that the Prime Minister must be a Chinese. We are saying it's up to the people, right? And of course, Cabinet chooses the Prime Minister. I was just making the point that the leaders are not the people who should be articulating that. Then what is the signal you are putting throughout vertically and horizontally? To me, that was a big dampener. And I've cited that, I cited 3 instances when that has happened. I don't think that is acceptable. I just want to put that little bit out there. Thank you. Yeah.
Right. I would like to respond to both questions. Well, I think the very fact that we can have a conversation like this together, using one common language, will probably be one of the most positive aspects of our society. It may not be the case 50 years ago, which is definitely not the case. In the past, we do have schools of various language, whereby we have the Chinese school, Malay school, and so on. And for myself, I used to come from a traditionally Chinese school, whereby we studied Chinese as a first language and English as a second language. I was the second last batch of students who went through that. And the people before me who went through the full Chinese school. So those were the times where it is almost impossible for people to interact freely like this. So I thought, yes, we have moved on. We are able to communicate in such a way very freely right now. So that's probably the most positive aspect. Now, then we come to the second question. What is also affecting? I think that also the very reason that we have all moved, or most of us, or the younger generation, have moved into speaking English as in using English as a lingua franca of Singapore, has created some sort of a blind spots for a lot of us. There are still people who only speak their mother tongue, right? For Chinese, that's 18%. Will only speak mother tongue and feel difficult or embarrassed or sometimes unwilling to communicate in English. So when we all think that, yes, we have a lot of multilingual programs, we have a lot of multiracial programs, activities, and so on, a lot of these things are being thought out in the English language and being rolled out in the English language and function actually basically in an English dominant way. So for a lot of our probably more the older generation, this becomes a difficult part for them to integrate. So strangely, English is also our most positive aspect. It also becomes a hindrance to some of us. So this is what I want to say for the first 2 questions.
Sorry, if I could may I just respond? I find your point of view interesting. Thank you for sharing that. Yes, I do think the demographics of Singapore will direct what language one is more comfortable with. But when we have competency between English and Mandarin, or English and Malay, or English and Tamil, and the commonplace I put there at the workplace, social interactions on the sports field, all these are more different, situating it in different circumstances. And if in all of this, while one is competent, one prefers to use whatever you could mean by mother tongue, I do not know how we are going to bring people together. So going back, in my view, to what Billy had shared, I have faced that situation. I'm a former teacher where I found that the boys taking Tamil were so upset in class with the boys talking in Mandarin that they got into their own community and started talking in Tamil. So I pulled them out and I said, where are you going to go with this? They threw me back a few challenges. You are telling us to stop it. Are you telling them to stop it? I said, yes, in my classes, it ought to be in English. And if you are going to break away into that, then it's going to be 2 communities, and that is never good within a school system. These are the real texts of what is happening at the ground level. There are, in some instances, from some people I have heard, and please don't ask me, verify it, because it's what I have heard, that there are also some teachers who start talking in Mandarin to perhaps create better understanding of the subject matter. This is what I call the slippery slope, right? Because then where will your minorities go to say whatever they wish to say? So I'm saying these are the things we got to keep looking out for and preserve what we already have and prevent the damage control. And yes, if I were Billy and I was empowered enough, I would tell them very nicely, hey guys, you all speak in Malay, then me how, then sorry, maaf, and then they will come back to English. But if we don't keep saying it and become Mr. Nasty in a nice way or Miss Nasty in a nice way, I think we lose more, but not many people want to do it. So there's a lot of acceptance in our different environments because it is so hard to go and tell anyone at the workplace, hey, hi guys, why are you all switching into this language? How do you want others to feel included? I think it's a tough call that we are facing, but we need to do it if we value it.
Definitely, I agree. We need to have the sensitivity when using our mother tongue. At the same time, we need to have the same degree of sensitivity when we're using English, thinking that as if everybody understands that. That may not be the case, I'm just saying.
Yeah, so this is really what I mean when I say that in Singapore, in all aspects of our life, race is so overt. It's present like in our everyday interactions, like in what language we choose to use, consciously or unconsciously. It's there in when we talk about, okay, who could be our next PM. So it's, in all these different contexts, right? But like Chile was saying, the beauty is that we can gather like this and talk about it. I think what's also been coming up is this idea of cultural awareness and sensitivity. And I do feel that we can do better in that. There are these little, I suppose people would call it casual racism, right? Certain moments where, because you're not of the majority race, you might be, people unconsciously maybe discriminate against you or say some things about you or whatever. And it's sometimes it's so common, people don't even notice it. Since everybody has shared an anecdote, right? I can share one. So recently I went flat hunting, and then one of the property agents, he showed me the flat, and then he said, and the neighbors are Chinese. And I'm like, what has that got to do with anything? What has that got to do with anything? And it took me a while to actually really figure out what that was about, because it's something that didn't occur to me, right? And then I thought, wow, but he can say that to me in such a matter-of-fact way, like assuming that that's a concern or that I will understand it. I'm thinking, you mean that, maybe his other customers or clients, have those concerns? And it shouldn't be the case because, like Salima said, so many of us grew up in a HDB, right? Yeah, we mix around with different ethnic groups, but it's there. And it's just so, seems so normal, right? And I think there's a lot of, in these kinds of cases where we can really do better.
Yeah, I'd like to respond. I don't agree that it's a good thing that we have race front, center, and back. I think we can afford as a society to reduce the amount of race consciousness. In the end, it's not going to help us. I don't think it'll be solved by removing the word race in our IC. I think that's too simplistic. It's a lot deeper. And so I don't think we need to continue with the same level of emphasis on race. I think we should de-emphasize it as we move along. And the truth of the matter is, the fault lines are not just along race going forward. If you ask me, the real fault lines are going to be along class lines in Singapore. People of the same class across races actually get along. It's bifurcated. Among the more well-off, people don't look at race anymore.
Yeah.
And among those who are really poor, they don't look at race very much. That's my observation. Right. So really, I think if we look at fault lines across the board, you will see that race is just but one of them. There are many other fault lines that we have to contend with. Now, going forward, what is it that we need? My suggestion and my wish is that we have a less engineered society. I think that's where the solution is. The government needs to trust people more, and we need to have a higher tolerance for mistakes as we trust more. Because we are going for 100% hit list, so everything that we do has to be done correctly, everybody ends up playing safe. We are not being truthful and honest with each other. That's why in my essay, I was provocative in suggesting that if we continue to emphasize harmony, we could end up being less cohesive. Because cohesiveness, in its true sense of the word, actually comes when you're able to weather a fight, weather discord, weather things that are uncomfortable, discomforting, right? But when you are so rule bound, everything is sort of prescribed for you. You end up sweeping things under the mat. You end up censoring your emotions and feeling that you don't have the right to express how you feel. When this is bottled up for a long time, it is a very dangerous thing because at some point it will implode, right? And it comes out very ugly. Therefore, I think the time has come for us to trust a lot more, engineer a lot less, and be a lot more tolerant of mistakes in the process. I think we also need to be a lot more forgiving if we want the trust to happen. I am very, very saddened that we've become such an unforgiving, intolerant society. And that should stop. Because as we open up the space for free conversation, for people to come out and be open and honest, which is what we want, we must also be willing to help people find their path and not by tearing them down. We need a culture of forgiveness, a culture of tolerance. Then I think we can create sufficient safe zones for people to come out and have conversations like this. Unfortunately, a lot of these conversations are taking place among the intelligentsia. We are creating a safe space among ourselves. Sometimes we have to ask ourselves whether we are over-intellectualizing an argument. That's something that I'm concerned about. So I think we need to listen to people from different backgrounds, listen with an open mind, listen with a heart to forgive when mistakes happen. I think we'll be a much better society. And I'd like to reiterate once more, let's be grateful for what we have. In the process, I feel that we are losing a little bit of that. Let's be grateful for what we have. I'm not saying it's perfect. It's far from perfect. But for us to move forward, I think a certain amount of humility is necessary.
So can I just add one word to the thought line that Viswa say about the it is class? I just want to add religion to it too, because I think race may be the thought line in the 60s, but now you actually, besides social class, there's also religion is one of the thought line I feel in Singapore.
Thank you for what you said, Viswa. It really, it was also very poignant because it's exactly what I talk about in my essay, is that for a very long time, we've always been very, very afraid to have these very tough conversations. Because whenever something happens, especially in today, 21st century, all of us are on our phones, all of us have social media, it literally just like that. And people just get pissed off online. And immediately the fingers start pointing, who's at fault? Why are you offending this? Why are you trying to stir up this? And, it's when you talk about forgiveness and, teaching people the right way from wrong and sort of like a gentler approach, right? I think that's why the update in the maintenance of Racial or Religious Harmony Act is trying to do this year. And hopefully going forward, that will help us tackle these issues of racial harmony better. But it always has to start with us having the difficult conversation and also having the, I would say, courage to talk about these issues more and not shy away because we want to just sweep under the rug and pretend that everything is fine. I feel that's something that a lot of Singaporeans, myself included, are guilty of. Whenever there are these, like, for example, what Salima said, these issues of, like micro-racism or microaggressions rather, I feel that a lot of the minority races, and feel free to correct me here, we've learned not to accept but to tolerate a lot of it. And I think that's a very toxic, unhealthy way to deal with it. But when it happens, we should point it out, no matter how uncomfortable it is, so that moving forward, we learn how to better respect each other and to prevent these things from becoming habits that ultimately will just blow up one day.
But, Billy, if I may just add to the point, I used to think that we should not, it's not enough that we are tolerant. We need to move towards a greater acceptance and even celebration of differences. But I've come to realize something. It's not that acceptance should replace tolerance. It should live together. Because there will continue to be things that we dislike, we can't accept. There will be. And there are preferences that we all have. We have preferences for color. We have preferences for hairstyle. We have preferences there will be times when, to be truthful to ourselves, we may not be able to accept something, but at least tolerate. So what I'm saying is acceptance should not replace tolerance. Acceptance should live side by side with tolerance. And we should have the humility to accept that there will be some things that we can't expect others to accept. But then tolerance comes in.
Sorry, if I may come in after Viswa, right? I think I want to go back to what Salima raised about religion and all that. And I missed discussing this in my paper, but thankfully, Kenneth Paul Tan has got it quite well elaborated and expanded in his paper, Intersectionalities. So race and by class, that was talked about earlier, educational status. So a person who feels perhaps being discriminated against based on one's race, is that person's education levels lower perhaps? Is it because of the dwelling, the accommodation, the languages one speaks, the religion, etc.? The matrix on intersection is very important. Race could be a determinant, or race could be a minor thing contributing to stuff depending on how that person feels violated. And I think he mentioned it very well. And I think this is currently the thing that we are not, I feel at a national level, we are not wrapping our heads around it more closely, intersectionality. So it impacts, and also certain things that Dr. Chi has raised, some parts of intersectionality is part of all that we are talking about, is what I would like to put out there. The other part on the word tolerance, I'm so sorry, Viswa, tolerance is out of the realm. And I think Baksong Rick has used two good words in his final chapter, acceptance and accommodation. But tolerance is already a different positioning of oneself. If I tolerate someone, I am not bringing that person onto that level of equality as me. Sorry, my background for a number of years has been in human rights, so I too have woken up to a number of things that I had to deconstruct and work my way through. So what I think going forward, which is the third part, which you haven't put out, moderator, but I'm going to it anyway, is I do think we really got to deconstruct what we mean by racism throughout the school. I know that there's stuff going on within the school, Racial Harmony Day, plus what you mentioned, Billy, about our civic and moral education. I am clueless now. What is the discussion at that level? How is that happening? And to what extent are we workshopping, like what we are discussing now? It needs to happen with younger kids. They will tell you how they feel. They disagree with you. We got to do a lot of working through with all of them, because their world is not just the CMIO, which I, like some other authors have said, is outmoded and is outdated, because Singapore itself, that we are already open to many different people living in Singapore. Our children are going to live in a world that is exposed to so many different types of people. Therefore, what kind of approach do they need to take on? The language you use, the whole conceptual approach, I think all are very important. So I think we got to deconstruct to go forward and tighten a lot of our areas, is what I would like to put forward, and placing it top of the agenda, education, whether with the young, with the adults, etc. And Tony, this is Tony, and we have to develop our own coping skills, how how when different points of view happen.
As Brema has already mentioned twice, I think some of you have already moved to question 3, which is, what is the item that is top of your wish list for the future of Singapore's racial harmony? Let me share my perspective. I think that racial prejudice is steeped in society, that there's no running away from it, and all of us have it to some degree or other. And racial prejudice comes from ignorance. So top of my wish list for the future is to see a lower level of ignorance. In my closing essay in the book, I made a proposal, which is that every school and educational institution should invite speakers to come and speak to the class, speakers of every ethnicity, so that Singaporeans from the youngest age onwards would have these chances to interact with people of different ethnicities, just to increase the contact with people outside their bubble, their families, and their limited social circles. And that's what I suggested in the book. But I've been having some conversations with people recently on this topic, and there's something else that has caught my attention, which is that the same sort of proactive effort to reduce ignorance could take place on a larger scale. Like take, for example, if you think about what Channel 8, Surya and Vasantam have been presenting to our people for the last 56 years, it is actually news and media content which exists in a bubble. I don't watch Channel 8, Surya and Vasantam every night. I'm not speaking from 100% data, but I've channel surfed enough to be confident in making this suggestion, which is that these 3 channels should do more to feature people of the other ethnicities. I mean, how often do you see Malay and Indian Singaporeans interviewed and featured on Channel 8? And the same for the other 2 channels. I think if we took a cold hard look at the media content that's been produced for the last 56 years, I think most people would agree that we could do more in this space.
See, Baksong, in the as early as 90s, mid-90s, there was already some form of stipulation by MDA, Media Development Authority then, before it became IMDA, that each vernacular station or channel has to carry a certain percentage of content about the other ethnic communities. I know because I was involved, I was on the board of MDA, and this discussion actually happened. And in fact, it predated that even when I was in SBC, before 94, from 92 onwards, there was a lot of emphasis and discussion about this, the need for this. So I know that there is some regulation and requirement for this by all the vernacular channels, but I'm not sure whether anything has changed. I believe that it is still existing. There's a requirement, but naturally today, the reality is commercial. All of these channels are commercial channels, and they're expected to bring in commercial revenue in the form of advertising. And I guess, given those realities, they may find it hard to stick to those regulations. I don't know, but I know that there are regulations that exist.
But given the extent to which the state is interventionist in this country, and especially in an area like racial harmony, all the more pay attention to this area that is well within their control.
I agree. So it's, all I'm saying is, I think it does exist, and perhaps it's a question of enforcing it.
Would that then make it over-engineered?
Well, I agree with you. I agree, That's why the ideal state is for us to systematically reduce the amount of engineering. But at the same time, we do need the state to intervene and be a neutral arbiter where things go wrong.
I think Brema used a word called, Brema, you used the word deconstruct.
Deconstruct. Yeah, I use deconstruct because I'm my critical theory. I'm a deconstructor. I see things that way, and I do think we got to take it apart to refix. You know. Yeah.
I think we need to deprogram as well.
Yeah, just to Rick's point, right? One on the channel. I think we need to balance. It's also quite good to have some communal channel. Whatever I want to know what's happening, at some of the Malay Muslim community, what are the issues that is hurting them, what are the sentiments on the ground. I do listen to Warna and watch Surya, or the other way around. I think, yeah, I do. And it gives a little bit of a pulse on what's on the ground. And then when I wanted to know what's happening elsewhere, I watch, CNA or Straits Times. But it's quite good to have some communal channel. So to engineer it totally will also means you are not getting to hearing the voices of some of this community. And also the point that we raised, there are some of our folks, especially the elderly, who do not speak English. If there is too many people speaking English, I know someone like my mother who's 80 years old will feel marginalized. They're like, every channel is speaking in English. Where do I get my source of English news? Then she will go to Malaysian news. She will go to Batam news. And that will happen because, we have regional channels. She say, okay, you're not attending to my requirement. I just go to Batam or Malaysia channel. So I think we need to have some communal channel. The other thing, you talk about speakers at school. I feel that we have to go beyond speakers at school, go beyond racial harmony days, because those are like one time. It's very good. I recommend every school to have that speakers having in-depth discussion such as this. What I have found to be really quite life-changing, I see it, is really immersive volunteering at schools. Not the type of volunteering where you stand at the street and you sell the flag day and, people donate money in a box and you sell the flag, right? Not that. By immersive volunteering, I mean going into someone's house, having someone with a different race going to someone's house, not once or twice, but every week. Because every week is very organic. You go to someone's house. Initially, the mindset may be, I'm here for my value in action hours. Or maybe I'm going there because I need to help this family. But when you go to someone's house to befriend them, to volunteer, after a few weeks, it becomes an equal relationship. You realize that, hey, they also have something to offer to me. So I think that is something that we could really think about, what kind of immersive volunteering where we can have cross-culture, cross-class, social class, so that there is a fertilization. There is a cross-fertilization of ideas, of values, and the hybrid that you get of this cross-fertilization will be a uniquely Singapore society, our Singapore soul. It may take 1 or 2 generations, but a one-on-one relationship at home is a good way to start.
Yeah, I agree with Salima and about this. Inviting speakers of another ethnic group may not be enough. Really, you need not only passively listening to, but also positive or proactively engaging in. So I'm in NIE. So basically in Asian languages and cultures whereby the 3 racial groups come together. But in the past, we see a lot of Chinese class, Malay and Tamil separately. So we were talking about this recently with our colleagues in other divisions. So they were telling me actually 20, 30 years ago, they used to have quite a lot more classes whereby the 3 ethnic groups come together, for example, to learn a little bit about different cultures, to learn about CCE in that time, national education, in the same class. So when we talk about this, we found that in our current day curriculum is not the case. It's always in silos. So we have been starting to do some changes, getting common slots for the 3 divisions, Chinese, Malay, and Tamil, to come together to have common class. And not only that, you probably need to engineer a little bit here. You will need to form the students in such a project work group or groups whereby the different races will come together and work together on the same project. So this actually allow us to interact more often, more frequently. And because there's a common goal, you need to score for your modules and so on. Yes, I think it will help us understand each other a little bit more. And besides this, I think CCA celebrations in school and so on should not be restricted to that particular race. For example, Chinese New Year. We really need or should invite performers or participants from other races to come together, not only as participants listening, but actually actively performing, coming together with different races of students coming together and performing. So these are some of the things which we can do.
That's where arts and theatre and music and sports comes in. We're playing catch up as a country since the Esplanade was born, right? But I dare say we are on the right track because arts actually bridges that a lot, where we come together and there's a lot of things you can do through the artistic sphere and creativity. And it's good to laugh at ourselves every once in a while. But I just really ply with the thought of the over-engineering.
Yeah.
Because we're very good at engineering.
Yeah.
I want to add on to this, or sorry if you don't mind, Mrs. Basker, the late Mrs. Basker, right? How she began and brought in different cultural elements as a choreographer and found a colleague, a Malay choreographer, and how they brought in many parts. The engineering came in when systemic structural stuff came in, like, hello, got to do this for this festival and that festival. It has to be in this form. And the choreography talent of the person, in a way, the person has to struggle with that. So I think the organic part of this is, I think, quite important. But I just want to go back to also what Rick had shared. I've seen some programs on Vasantham, I cannot remember what it is called even, where a young, both are young, a young Malay Indian person speaks in English and a young Indian woman speaks in Tamil, and it is on heritage issues. I found that really good. I think I caught 2 of it, because they are educating the population and they are not leaving any party out, because it comes both in Tamil as well as in English. But that's already now a bigger question in the context of Singapore today. We have a lot of Indians who are citizens and they are not Tamil speakers. Many of them could be speaking Hindi, Urdu, or from other parts of India. So our Singapore cosmos has to adjust, right? We cannot keep saying this is the way it is. It will upset. There will be people who will get upset. And I think all these are important things that we need to look at in a more preemptive approach rather than wait for it to burst and then after that, what do we do? I do think these are important considerations that I think MCCY, whoever who's projecting into our future, needs to think harder upon. The last part that I would like to share, Rick and myself, we were in the same papers, right? I remember as a news reporter, if I come back without a quote from somebody from a different ethnic group, I will be told on an issue that is related to national interest, can you go back out and get the quotations from, let's say, whether it is a Malay and Indian or whatever. But I don't see that happening so closely with our newspapers today. I'm talking about the English press, because that's your umbrella press. So we have lapses, and I hope the academic side in communication and new media and whatever will start looking more closely at how views are made in the 2 main domains, broadcasting and news.
To address the point about engineering, allow me to highlight a point which is in my opening essay, which may give the intellectual and maybe even philosophical basis to my earlier suggestion about proactive efforts to reduce the level of ignorance about other ethnicities. And this is where I quoted from Mr. Rajaratnam's draft of the pledge in 1966. And the wording was, we, the citizens of Singapore, pledge ourselves to forget differences of race, language, and religion. To forget. What I took from that is that what is required is a conscious effort, because only a conscious effort, which may be perceived as engineering, can overcome what lurks in the subconscious.
And I think the conscious effort will only come about if we acknowledge the demons within us. I think part of the problem with pushing for a perfect society is it doesn't exist and it will never exist. So first and foremost, I think we need to acknowledge, and we need to also, that's what I meant by tolerance, we need to tolerate when someone is trying to acknowledge and failing, because it's not easy. It's not easy to get rid of that the races that resides in each one of us, or the discrimination that is. So I think we need to accept that. First, we need to acknowledge that it does exist. Now, how do we tackle it? Then I think we'll start seeing progress. But in the process of making progress, mistakes will happen. And society must be willing to forgive people when they try and fail and try again. And I feel that that kind of an iterative process is necessary. Going back to the point about reducing the level of engineering, what I mean is, in society, a certain level of regulations are necessary, especially when it's multiracial society, to protect the interests of certain groups that can't protect themselves, perhaps, But I'm talking about reducing a lot more the engineering that takes place at a macro level.
Yeah.
We need to take those things out. So, and allow for a little bit more spontaneity. So I'd like to just share one experience I had, a very positive experience. I chair the School Advisory Council of Hague Girls Primary School. And I'm very proud to be associated with the school because there's tremendous amount of multiracialism, multiculturalism in that school, which I've seen growing. So one of the things that we did was, about 2 or 3 years ago, we suggested that don't put it down as a rule, but something we encourage parents to encourage their children to participate as much as possible in a different cultural activity. It could be painting, it could be dance, it could be something, and you know what? Spontaneously, there has been conversion. We try and influence the parents to consider taking the chance, right? Today, we have got about 40% participation in each of these cultural activities, 40% from a different ethnic community. For example, Indian dance, 40% of the participants are non-Indian, So, but this is done in a way where it is led by example, and it is encouragement as opposed to regulation and stipulation. And we are seeing good outcomes. And then where the testimonials are positive and strong, other parents are encouraged to do the same. And slowly they become less afraid of someone else's culture and to participate in that culture. So, but it didn't happen overnight. It required some nudging, some persuasion. And when it finally happens, it's wonderful. But what it requires is for us to be a little bit more patient for some of these things to happen.
One thing that we haven't touched on, I don't know because it's sensitive or what, is the fact that quietly there's a phenomenon that is actually quite pervasive now in our little Singapore, and it's called love. Love conquers all. I mean, I take buses, I take trains, I walk on the streets, and I see so many beautiful young couples of very different ethnic backgrounds, and they're holding hands and they're loving each other. And I think the future for me, I'm now 73 years old. In fact, today is my birthday. So
happy birthday.
Thank you. Hi, thank you. I feel very, very happy that as, my final days are upon me, I think Singapore has really progressed in the way our founding fathers wanted it to progress, to develop a really multi-cosmopolitan group that will be a showcase to the rest of the world, that if you put your mind to it and your heart to it and your brains and hands to it, you will succeed. And I think we are in a way showing, the rest of the world that it can happen. And actually, quietly, many societies around the world are using Singapore as a kind of a model in terms of inter-ethnic mixing and plurality. So education has a lot to do with it. Proximity has a lot to do with it. But I think we are getting there. It's a work in progress. It always will be. It has been for 10,000 years. But as geography and history merge, I think we are getting there. Thanks.
Bravo.
Yeah, well said, Gopal. Yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah, I think we need to have faith in the younger generation as well. And I think someone has mentioned our young generation is also getting more and more ethnically diverse. The young Singaporean is no longer, a lot of them no longer just pure Chinese, Malay, Indian, Eurasian, whatever, There is so much more diverse. So they're growing up in a really multicolored society,
absolutely.
and that is their reality. The thing I think we can do better at is what Viswa talked about, looking at our own demons and not being afraid to say, hey, we we didn't do this well enough, or we made a mistake there, or this is something that is not right that we should address, and kind of admitting to our faults and our warts, that's something we can really do better. And I think we have to also inculcate in the next generation that it's okay, that it's okay to make mistakes, and what it is to overcome those, and what it is that binds us together as Singapore, and what's worth fighting for, right?
For me, the future, very simple. I take it as less blame, less justification, more responsibility, more gratitude, and leadership. And I think the whole fear, the kiasu syndrome, we're not a society that takes risk. And this is where business comes in, because if you look at the opposite side of the world, there is such a thing as business risk. And Singapore is very unforgiving. When you take a business risk and you become a bankrupt or you lose money, suddenly you're slated, you're at the zero line of ACRA. And I think this has to be part of a change as well, in terms of understanding that, hey, if I lose money, I did a really bad business, there is something I gained and I learned from it. And this, I think, Kapil, you're right. It's just part of our growth as a country. But totally agree that it takes a lot more love and forgiveness of ourselves.
Yes.
Because we all grew up with that wanting to be number one and strive. And it's only when you cross the border and you go to another country and you say, I'm from Singapore, and you speak good English, that they say, wow, your English is great. And then we can scatter and speak Mandarin. We take a lot of that for granted. Because we're always looking at ourselves, comparing ourselves. And I always say, for me, it's about what we can do as Singaporeans to actually fly the flag. Because if we stay in Singapore, okay lah, we have something to complain about. But when you actually leave the country, for me at least, I have a much deeper appreciation of where I grew up and my education and my have and have-nots. Because my whole essay is not so much about racial disharmony, but I think more of the lines between the have and the have-nots, which you mentioned as well. It's more of the which school do you come from, which cohort, where do you live. We grew up with the 5 C's. That was my era, thriving. And as I grew older, I start to acquire other kinds of C's, like appreciation for culture, care, consideration. And I think as a society, we're moving towards that. And I think arts and culture plays a big, important part. Music, dance. I mean, hearing the story about Hague Girls' School, I think that's great, because then it's in the physical, right? And it's inspiring. And you're not teaching them through a mental state, but you're empowering them to participate at a different level. And I think fun and inspiration is part of the whole game. We study too much, we don't have fun, it's a negative thing, Doing classes is not pleasant at all. I in my time, I have a fear when I do programs, and I always say, is there a test at the end of this? Because it's just in our DNA, right? That's for me, at least. That's from my experience. So I think when young kids do, they do more programs, they're passing in Polytechnic, they actually don't have so-called exams, but they do more project work, and seeing these young people come together to collaborate, to work with computers, go out and do interviews, etc. I think that's a very good step. And I think I'm very pro a lot of the collaboration that happens now within the education sector. And I think it took a lot of people having these kind of discussions to say, what needs to happen next? What do we try? So I think catalysts are so important because whatever the education system has given us, someone tried it. Somebody said, let's do it. And then did it work? Did it not work? When I was in primary 3, we had to do history in Mandarin. And in my classes, we couldn't even speak Mandarin, let alone do history. And all of us failed. And we had to do it for 3 years. And they dumped the program after that. So there was a catalyst who thought it was a really good idea. And then somebody else who decided it wasn't a good idea. And I think these people are real gems because they actually take the risk. Yeah. Singaporeans, we need to take the risk. One leader at a time, one person at a time, and then it'll start to build more leaders. And my biggest wish is for Singaporeans to go out of the country and get a deeper appreciation of our upbringing and our shared traditions and how we grow up together in the HDB flats. I think we stay here, we tend to overanalyze ourselves. That's my take on it.
I just want to add on an important point to what Joyce has raised. It brought back the risk-taking. I am appreciative of what Minister for Education, Mr. Chan Chun Sing, is doing. I'm also quite surprised at myself that he is bending the subjects now into ability level. That is fantastic, because what Dr. Chi also was sharing about what is happening at NIE, clustering, right? Many different students and pupils will be coming together following geography or maths or whatever based on their learning ability in that subject. I think that is what happened long ago in Sealing Secondary, and the minister at that time was not too keen, but almost 20 years later, it is happening. I think it spells well for what we are discussing here about opportunities to interact with many different students. I just want to say that. And these are all the policy and sector tenets, but I think for me, the maintenance of the racial harmony, I do not believe in the word harmony. I think it should be Racial Equality Act, right? So we'll wait and see.
I'd like to also share. For me, I share what Audrey said, Kristal say. I feel the future is bright because I see young people, really love does unite people from different race. So that's great. So I do see that happening. I also feel that we cannot rest on our laurels to say that, hey, we are here, we can pat ourselves on the back. Because diversity, inclusion, these are all things which are living and breathing. And we are one small island. We are connected globally, what's happening around the world, what's happening in the region, what region affect us. So there must always be a check and balance. There must be people who are in the community, civil society, who become that check and balance to say, hey, this is too much. Hey, this one we need to pull back. This is good. So it is something that needs to happen all the time. I also agree with Brema that maybe instead of using racial harmony, we think of the word equity. Equity, to reframe our mindset. So, but I'm feeling very hopeful. Singapore, we are a step in the right direction. Just judging from my own life experience, my personal experience of what I experienced 20, 30 years ago and what I experience now, I've seen the difference.
I would like to just have a quick line to pay my respects to my English literature professor over there, Professor Kapal Singh, because what he said about love is actually what I wanted to put into words, whereby dealing with racism, casual racism, those sort of things. I think one of my wishes is that as a society, we don't get so outraged all the time. Every small thing we blow up. And I even heard that there's a movement getting people to, you need to get angry, otherwise you can't get heard. This worries me. And I think really the way to have better intergroup relationships is to follow what the good professor says. That put love first, and then from love comes forgiveness, comes acceptance, comes everything else. So that's all I wanted to say. Thanks.
Thank you.
What Kapal said about the younger generation, everyone saying the future is bright. Okay, it does warm my heart because I am the representations somewhat in this group of the younger generation. And I do agree. I think that if I can speak for my generation, perhaps we're a lot more open. The first thing is we never see race, or largely a lot of us, we're not racist, or we don't have these sort of, I guess, reservations about interacting with other races and stuff. But at the same time, something that Baksong wrote in his opening essay about how racial harmony is a constantly I can't really reiterate this well, but it's not a finite thing. Like it's a constant goal. And I think that all of us, especially because everyone else here, I don't want to say old is a very bad word, everyone else here is older than me, is that we got to keep at it. We got to sort of gain the courage to talk about these things. Yep. And that if not within your time, at least set a precedent for our time, because
Yeah.
eventually one day we will be older, and then we have to set the example as well. So yeah, future is bright. I am optimistic that our generation will pave the way, hopefully, for even more open society and one that has racial harmony.
I'm sure you will.
We started this conversation this evening by looking at the positives. I must say I am a bit surprised at how positive we have been in concluding our discussion this evening. On behalf of the writers, thank Marshall Cavendish for the vision in conceiving of this book that has come to fruition because of all of you. And having read all your essays, giving and generous essays, I was quite hopeful for that tonight's webinar would go well, but I didn't think that it would be so heartwarming. So thank you very much, all of you. Joyce, Salima, Viswa, Billy, Audrey, Chile, Rema, Alexius, and Kappa.
Thank you.
Here's my
Thank
love
you,
heart,
Bakong.
everyone. See?
I know, I love it. I love it.
Thank you, guys. Good night. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Night.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Good to
Bye.
see everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye.
Bye-bye.